Aloha mai kako. My name is Jon Sprague, and I want to introduce the Symposium on Biodiversity and Resilience on Lānaʻi by talking a little bit about the island's history, as well as some of the promise and peril of managing natural resources on such a relatively small place. To do so, however, we have to start with something of a ghost story. Legend has it that the ruler of Maui, Ka'alaneo, had a son by the name of Kaulula'au. Now, the son was a troublemaker, and he liked to go out in the dead of night and pull up trees by the root. As he got older and stronger, the damage became so severe that the people of Maui decided that he needed to be somewhere else. The solution to this problem was to put him in a double-hull canoe, paddle a little ways west, and dump him onto an island that was inhabited only by man-eating demons and ghosts. Stranded, alone and forsaken, he was left to his fate. But Kaulula'au was strong and smart and persistent, and one by one he banished the demons from the island. The last demon was defeated on an exposed lithified sand dune called Kalaihi on the northeast part of the island. It was on that day of Kaulula'au's victory over the final demon that the island became inhabitable by people and earned its name. Lānaʻi a Kaulula'au. Lānaʻi for short. As a land manager, one of the things that really stands out about this story is that even in the time of legend, Lānaʻi was considered at civilization's edge. One of the reasons for this, I think, is its relative lack of water. This is highlighted by the island's sustainable yield from the freshwater aquifer. At 40,000 gallons per square mile per day, Lānaʻi is fully an order of magnitude less than its closest competitor, Molokai, at 310. This is a defining characteristic of the ecology of Lānaʻi. Another major force that has affected the island's natural resources in the last 150 years is the majority land ownership of the island by a series of single entities. These two factors, low levels of natural resources, particularly water, and majority land ownership, have offered both promise and peril to the island. On the plus side, lower densities of residents and fewer visitations by people has limited the introduction of invasive species, including mongoose, feral hog, rapido death, little fire ant, and a host of noxious plant species. In the modern era, Lānaʻi's isolation allows for additional, relatively cost-effective biosecurity protocols. Furthermore, majority land ownership has made it easier to effect landscape-level changes for the better when there is momentum and funding. This is highlighted historically by the successful extirpation of goats and feral hog from the island. However, there is a flip side to this coin. Fewer resources and less water makes for a less resilient landscape, and majority land ownership makes it just as easy to effect landscape-level changes for the worst as it does for the better. Unfortunately, it's hard to argue that the benefits have outweighed the costs. Overgrazing, short-sighted agricultural practices, and poor biosecurity have led to massive habitat loss. Mismanagement of introduced game species has also left its mark. Axis deer, first introduced in 1920, now number in the tens of thousands. Steve Hess will be talking about axis deer and mouflon sheep distributions on island later in the symposium. For me, the greatest illustration of the damage done to the natural habitat is an old shipwreck on the windward coast. In the early part of the 1900s, there was a ferry that went between Lahaina and Keeaumoku. It broke down in 1925 and was left on the beach to rot. Today, the ferry is 300 feet from water's edge, and not because it's moved inland, but because that's how much sediment has run off the slopes over the last 95 years. Despite this damage and habitat loss, there are still many species on island to protect. Lānaʻi Hale is home to 2 endemic kahuli tree snails, which David Sisko will be presenting on, as well as one of the densest remaining colonies of Ua'u, the Hawaiian petrel, which Rachel and Andre Rain will be discussing. Kari Bogner will cover in part 21 of the endangered plant species that we have on island. And much of our effort over the last few years has gone into stabilizing these rarest of the rare. Predator trapping, which Christina Pisani will be discussing, and small-scale fencing has been particularly effective in helping all of these species. But these efforts may be in vain if we can't also start healing the land as a system rather than individual species. This is true not just for the plants and the animals, but for the long-term ability of people to call Lānaʻi home as well. Particularly at risk are Lānaʻi's nearshore reef and watershed, both of which the community rely on for food, sanitation, and drinking and irrigation water. The value of food and water security that these ecosystem services provide is even more apparent in the time of COVID, as logistical chains stretch beyond capacity. Protecting and enhancing what we have on island is a far better investment than relying on goods from off-island to fill that void. But perhaps the most challenging issue we face in this regard is game animal management. While deer and sheep provide healthy food and economic opportunities to Lānaʻi residents, their current numbers are far in excess of what the land can sustain. These are socially very complex issues, and community involvement towards sustainable solutions is hugely important. Shelley Preza and Ben Ostringer are going to talk about community engagement and education right after this talk. These observations bring us to one of our primary initiatives over the next 5 years, called the Kuahibi Akai project. In partnership with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, this 5-year grant-based project focuses on first stabilizing and then rehabilitating 20,000 acres of windward Lānaʻi from watershed to the nearshore reef. In doing so, we hope to protect the natural resources in that area for the benefit of the island and its residents. Our hope is that the lessons learned from this project will be applied to the rest of the island systematically going forward. Year 1 grantees from the University of Hawaii, the Nature Conservancy, USGS, and the San Diego Zoo have been focused on establishing baselines, metrics, and plans for year 2 through 5. Pono Pacific has been steadily working on an 85-acre predator-proof fence in the Wa'u colony under the same program. While COVID-19 has made year 1 a challenge, headway has been made, and we are hopeful that work will steadily progress. The second-year RFP is currently open, and pre-proposals are due by September the 9th. One thing that the Kuahibi Akai project highlights is the importance of conservation partnerships on Lānaʻi. While Pūlama Lānaʻi's 20-person conservation department takes on roles that include biosecurity, native and endangered species management, and invasive species control, we don't always have the personnel or expertise on island to have the greatest impact. And unfortunately, it is impossible to do justice in this talk to the support that we have received from our government, NGO, non- and for-profit partners. One key acknowledgement, however, is the MOU that Pūlama Lānaʻi has with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is now in its 6th year. In many ways, that MOU set the stage for many of the cooperative relationships we have today. I want to round out this introduction where it began. The story of Kaululaʻau is one of coming of age and of redemption. The spoiled child who was banished from Maui learned perspective and humility through his struggle extirpating the island's demons, and the story ends that he went on to be a just and wise ruler. Personally, I didn't know this story until I moved to Lānaʻi, but like many in the Hawaii conservation community, I was familiar with the sound of his name from the Hawaiian proverb Hahai no Kauaʻi Kaululaʻau, the rain follows the forest. Kaululaʻau is the forest in that saying. So, if we take inspiration from the proverb and the hero story together, then it is the forest and the following rains that redeemed the island and banished the demons. It is the forest that made it possible for people to live on this little island on the edge. It was the forest that we have cut down and overgrazed, overfarmed, and neglected until its soil bled into the ocean and onto the reef. It is hard to look at this damage on the landscape and not see that some anthropogenic demons have crept back onto Lānaʻi. All that said, I am too optimistic to end on that note. I've seen the work that's already been done and am convinced that if the Lānaʻi community, the employees of Pūlama Lānaʻi, and all of our partners can channel the strength, wit, and perseverance of Kaululaʻau, that we are on the right track to be sure. I hope that by the end of this symposium, you feel the same. With that, I hope you enjoy the next couple of hours of talks. Mahalo nui, a ke aloha.